trauma is sometimes used somewhat loosely and promiscuously to refer to things that are not traumatic. So people will have a difficult experience and say, I was traumatized. No, they weren't. They just had a difficult experience. And as one of my colleagues points out, all trauma is stressful, but not every stress is traumatic. So sometimes people use the word to refer to difficult experiences, which is not the same as being traumatized. And on the other hand, where it really matters, which is in the area of health that you and I are both concerned in, whether it's physical or mental health, trauma is not understood nearly enough or used nearly enough. So that, to my mind, a lot of conditions of mind and body are actually very much trauma-related without the healing profession, particularly the medical profession, actually recognizing it. So trauma then it comes from the Greek word for wounding. Trauma is a wound. It's a psychic wound that leaves a scar, it leaves an imprint in your nervous system, in your body, in your psyche, and then shows up in multiple ways that are not helpful to you later on. So in its basic sense, trauma is a psychic wound. And if you look at the nature of a wound, on the one hand, if it's raw and open, it really hurts. So when somebody touches that wound that you sustained a long time ago, but it hasn't healed yet, you'll react like you're just being tormented all over again. This happens in relationships all the time. On the other hand, wounds scar over, and the scar tissue has certain features. It's very hard, it's rigid, so it's not flexible, so people tend to be rigid when they're traumatized. It also doesn't grow. So trauma very often stops emotional growth and development. So on the one hand, it's very raw and painful. On the other hand, it's even lacks sensation because scar tissue doesn't have nerve endings in it.
Because when I think about self-love, I think about the concept of actually connecting to our organ, not to sound cliche, but our organ of love, of compassion, which is our heart. And if we're not in a calm, grounded state in our nervous system to even turn inwards, even attune to what it is that my heart wants me to do in any moment, while I might think I'm on the surface showing up in service of loving someone else, in reality, I'm probably just operating on some conditioned habits and patterns. So I think to build self-love means to build space for the self, to recommit to caring for ourselves so that over time we can actually attune to our heart and be what I do think is intrinsically possible for each of us, being a compassionate, caring individual. And I think self-worth gets wrapped up in there too. The messages we send when we create space for ourselves, right, is for many of us unlearning this idea of being unworthy of having our needs met and actually beginning to create through action and lived experience the feeling, the embodied space of living in worthiness.
If your happiness depends on the actions of others, you know, you're at mercy of things that you can't control. And that's never where I want to be. So I always want to live in, like, me and my therapist talk about, like, my higher goddess, my higher self. Like, I always want to live there knowing that, you know, when I'm there, you can't take that away from me. That's mine. And no matter what, you can disagree with me, you can agree with me. That's not going, I'm not changing. I'm not shifting. I'm here. I'm in my higher goddess. Yeah. So I always live by, like, keep holding my happiness and not letting anyone else affect it. And though I fall victim to it at times,
of course, yeah.
As we all probably do.
Absolutely.
I strive every day to live in that place. So
I spent very many years, decades even, putting the world before me. I think the byproduct of that for a lot of us is we become increasingly resentful when we don't have space to express, whether it's our perspectives, our feelings, our wants, or our needs. Over time, the anger that builds up in that, I think, turns into resentment. And at least my journey of that was projecting it outward, blaming the relationships I was in or the people around me, only to realize that it was my lack of creating that space for myself. And as I often do, I like to talk about the science of things so I can make a case for the importance of self-focus. Because if we're not caring, especially for our physical body, if we're not taking care of those needs, actually when we think we're serving other people, we're actually operating quite selfishly.
That the best advice I can give you is to follow your own traditions. But I often say to them as well, don't wait for the acknowledgement from the government or from society, because it's going to take a long time coming. But you need to acknowledge your own suffering. You need to acknowledge your own pain. And then there's so many rituals, there's so many traditions, the dance and the chanting and the drumming and the sweat lodges and the sun dancing and the going back to the land and the wisdom circles and the restorative justice. There's so much wisdom. So what I'm saying to people is acknowledge your own suffering, but to look to the wisdom within, to want to healing. And it's there. That wisdom to heal is inside cultures, inside peoples, and inside individuals as well. We both have to acknowledge the suffering and not get stuck on it.
Yeah.
But then to look for the healing capacity within.
Yeah.
And you certainly can't wait for the world to... It's nice, but you can't wait for it. Otherwise, you're dependent on somebody else for your healing.
I started to look for myself because, yes, other people's feedback can be absolutely helpful, but I never would suggest that you just defer to what someone else assesses you to be or says of you. So I finally started to take it in and started to say, okay, if I continue to hear this and feel this way from that conscious perspective, I will always kind of acknowledge consciousness or learning how to observe ourselves in the context of this conversation within our relationships to be that first point of action. So I started to look. I started to pay attention and to assess really simplistically, Nicole, how connected are you? How present are you in any given moment? And as I began to check in with myself throughout the day, whether or not you want to set an alarm on your phone to do it or put some Post-it notes on, wherever you walk by regularly, or maybe even set a designated time during the day, over morning coffee or when I'm reading the newspaper, this is going to be my moment to check in. And the more regularly I checked in with where my attention is, the more I noticed that it was a million miles away.
Really?
I could be in conversation with someone, and while I'm here and I'm being talked at, right, I'm thinking about maybe what I'm going to respond to next, or I'm just somewhere else entirely. And the more I checked in and noticed that disconnection, the more then I built on that consciousness step and began to, because there's always 2 steps to change. Me becoming aware that I'm disconnected was only half the journey. Then I had to begin to make that choice to reconnect with myself.
Wow.
To shift that focus of attention, time and time again, from the thoughts that, they were consumed in, or even just worrying about someone else. Am I more attuned to the person across from me than to how I feel being across from the person? And the more I kind of flexed that muscle, the more then I was able to reconnect with what my body was doing in any given moment.
Well, interestingly enough, when I spoke about these brain circuits that we share with other mammals, for play and for loving and seeking, we also have a brain circuit for panic and grief. Why do we have that? Because life brings loss. And so grief is essential for life, because grief is coming to terms with the fact that something is gone and is not going to come back. So when a child experiences grief, and I said that the need of the child is to be able to experience all the emotions, they need to be able to experience the grief as well. And it doesn't matter whether from adult eyes we see that loss as major or minor. It's a question of how is the child experiencing it. And for a small child, even what looks like small losses can be very painful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we don't make the child wrong for it. We don't say, get over it, there's nothing wrong. Think of all the other children who are suffering. All that kind of relativistic, shaming stuff. We say, oh, it really hurts, doesn't it? You really wish Grandpa would be here with you. You really wish Mom and Dad weren't leaving each other. It hurts. In other words, you just validate their emotions. By doing so, you help them accept the loss, and you help them move through, and you help them learn that they can endure difficult emotions without having to become falling to pieces. So we have a circuitry for grief in our brains. It needs to be allowed to do its work.
We've just heard how love, when it's real, gentle, and unconditional, can become medicine for the wounded heart. But understanding healing is only the beginning. The real transformation begins when we stop analyzing our pain and start listening to it. In this next part, Dr. Gabor Maté takes us deeper into the practice of compassion itself. How to face what hurts with presence, patience, and truth. This is where the theory becomes real, where healing stops being an idea and starts becoming who we are.
And the acceptance that we're wounded, that almost inevitably, once we stop defending against our wounds, once we actually come to terms with them, we're almost automatically impelled to heal other people who are wounded. It's just how it seems to work. And I think that says something about human nature, actually. Sometimes when people ask a question or make a comment, I may invite them to come to the front and talk to me in order to explore something that they've said. And I think there's some important learning for all of us in that process, and maybe that individual who comes up will also be helped to gain some new insight. And so this is one of those situations. Would you be willing to come up and talk to me up here? What I heard you say is that you looked at your own stuff and you've had a lot of understanding and a lot of processing, but that despite the understanding that you've gained, you still have concern that you're not as fully able to be present and as effective as you might like to be. Is that the case?
Yes, and to be in and execute my full purpose of what I'm supposed to be here doing on this planet.
Okay. And do you know what that purpose is? Do you know what your calling is?
I feel that a lot of my work, interestingly, is about the things I have had trouble with, which is about having voice and helping others to have voice in the world for the things that they want to do to make this a better place.
So can I then understand your calling as, my calling is that people should have voice?
And be seen.
That people should be heard and seen?
Yes.
That's your calling?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What's blocking that? So what I'm hearing is you have a calling, a very clear calling. The calling is people are heard and seen. That's the calling.
Yeah.
But there's some kind of a blockage. Now don't analyze it, locate it in your body. So there's a sense of blockage, a sense of doubt, or associated with a sense of doubt that wants soothing. Is that the case? Nothing to do with your work. Okay? So when it arises, my advice is don't try and figure out how better to do your work, or how better to be present, or any of that, or how will I fulfill my calling. Your calling is really clear. But this part of you, guess what? Needs to be heard and seen. The process that I use, or that I've come to, is I call it compassionate inquiry. It's really very straightforward. The assumption is that much of what activates us, motivates us, or blocks us is early stuff. And that early stuff requires attention. And that many of us in this field have developed a very powerful intellect to analyze and to understand, but it never quite gets us there. And a therapist once said to me that when your parents didn't know how to hold you, you developed a mind to hold you instead. And this is why we go to the intellect so much. That's where we're comfortable. And this is why we become professors, you know, and intellectuals very often, to hold ourselves in a world that otherwise would be full of doubt and fear. So we have an intellectual framework, scaffolding to hold us. Of course, it's artificial, therefore it never alleviates the anxiety fully. And the more anxious we become, the more we hold on to our ideas out of sheer fear. But therefore, the thing is to get out of the intellect and just to go to the body. Now, by the way, this also works with your clients. So it's called compassionate inquiry. Compassionate because it invites and necessitates compassion for every part of that person, for all their behaviors, for all their ideas, for all their dysfunctions, everything. Because what you'll find out through compassionate inquiry or just this approach is that there's a valid reason for everything. There's a valid reason why people are addicted. There's a valid reason why people are violent. When I say valid, I don't mean that it's good to be violent. I mean, there's a valid reason in that person's makeup that makes the violence necessary. So compassionate for everything, doesn't matter how it shows up. And then inquiry, you're just curious. You just keep asking questions. Once you get out of your head, well, where in the body is it located? Because it's always located in the body. So again, the assumption is that whatever blocks us and whatever frustrates us is not the present. It's early stuff. And that's located in the body, and it has a meaning in relationship to our experience. So I'll say more about it as it unfolds, but those are the essential assumptions. Reason for everything, and that every human behavior, every human thought, every human emotion, every human reaction, doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside, reflects a desire to be loved or to love. And as Marshall Rosenberg, who teaches nonviolent communication, said, very often we make these communications, he calls it the tragic communication of a need. So that doesn't matter how people behave or speak, underneath it, there's some basic human need. That human need was at some point frustrated in early development, and that person has been all their lives trying to have that need met. Doesn't matter how they behaved, even if they behaved in the most aggressive and inhuman and obnoxious fashion. There's always a reason for it. So that means that when somebody comes for help, when somebody actually comes for help, then you have to be able to see that need and that real human being underneath the words and underneath the behavior. In other words, you have to see the person more clearly than they see themselves. And then not so that you can deliver your opinion to them and have them accept it, but so that you can mirror back to them their true selves.